You know what's dangerous about survival mode? At first, it works. It gets the bills paid. It helps you survive heartbreak or divorce. It helps you push through exhaustion. It helps you build something from absolutely nothing. And because it produces results, you start depending on it. You begin considering it wisdom and responsibility. Now, in your mind, it morphed into discipline, work ethic, or leadership. And because of that, you're now considered the strong one. But eventually, survival mode stops being the thing that saved you and starts becoming the thing that is quietly destroying you. I think that's what makes this so difficult for high capacity women to recognize, because survival mode rarely looks chaotic at first. Sometimes it looks successful. Sometimes it looks like the growing business, the packed calendar, the woman everyone depends on, the mom who never stops moving, the leader who always figures it out. And the world, it rewards that version of you. Until one day, your body starts telling the truth your mind has been overriding for years. For a lot of women, that's the moment survival mode stops looking strong. Because eventually your soul cannot sustain a pace your fear created. And what's wild is I didn't build my business because I wanted to become obsessed with work. I built it because I wanted freedom. I wanted presence. I wanted to be with my kids, and I wanted to create a life where I could actually be available to my family. But somewhere along the way, I became absent trying to create presence. And that realization changed everything. Welcome back to Karin with an I Build Bold. I'm your host, Karin, and this is a podcast for the woman who loves God, but is tired of building her life from fear. The woman who is carrying a lot of responsibility, leadership, motherhood, business, pressure, and is trying to figure out how to build boldly without living in survival mode. We are learning how to build from identity, from surrender, instead of self-protection. And today we're talking about what happens when survival mode stops looking like strength. Because survival mode can help you survive a season, but it was never meant to become your identity. And eventually, if fear keeps setting the pace of your life, it starts costing you your peace, your presence, your body, your relationships, and your ability to actually enjoy the life you built. So let's talk about it. If you're new here, this is a chronological journey I've been talking the audience through. So I recommend starting from the intro episode so you can understand the context of my story. But if you have been following along so far, thank you for listening. I would love if you could do me a huge favor and smash that like and subscribe button down below. It helps us so much, and it makes that darn algorithm really, really happy. And if I don't start saying that more often, my producer will be mad at me. So it really makes the algorithm and Greg happy. I just need to start saying that a lot more. I'm just making this podcast out of obedience to God, but I guess it makes me happy too. So maybe if we hit our first subscription milestone, we can get Greg on here and make him do something crazy, like, I don't know, eat hot peppers or something stupid. Oh no, he's gonna get mad at me for saying that. We can do, like, I don't know, a producer challenge or something. What do you think? We can let the comment section decide. I don't know, what do you think? A producer challenge? I could get on board with that. Now he's gonna be really, really mad at me. You He's gonna be like, "You couldn't just ask them to hit like and subscribe, Karen? You had to get hot peppers involved?" I told him if he wants me to say this, he needs to write me a script. And episode after episode, I still don't have a script. So now he's eating hot peppers. Or if you guys have a suggestion, I'm open to it. Greg will eat anything, right, Greg? Oh my gosh, he's gonna kill me. Anyway, like, follow, and subscribe. I digress. On to the next. Anyway, last episode, I talked a lot about prayer during uncertain seasons. how every year I would sit down and run projections for the business. And every year that math looked terrifying, and yet somehow God always provided. The business kept growing, opportunities kept coming, and needs just kept getting met. And honestly, after the bridal show breakthrough, things really started scaling. The business was growing rapidly, and we were booking incredible weddings. The brand was becoming more established in the Chicago wedding industry, and I began growing a team. Then in 2020, COVID hit, which honestly should have destroyed, a small wedding photography business. Weddings were postponed, some were canceling. Everything just felt so uncertain, and yet somehow God still provided. Not perfectly and not comfortably, definitely not comfortably, but he was just faithful. And I think that's really important. When you and when others hear this episode, I don't want you thinking that this is a story about God, abandoning me financially, because that is just the opposite of this story. God kept providing faithfully over and over and over. The problem was, for me, survival mode never left. Because even while provision was happening externally, internally, I was still living like disaster was one phone call away. And when 2021 came, the workload doubled because now we weren't only shooting current weddings, we were also shooting postponed weddings from the year before. And that was my fault because I assumed that disaster was going to hit. And so I overcompensated for the following year. And I made my workload worse because I didn't trust God. And now, on the outside, everything looked so successful. But internally, everything was becoming so unsustainable. And I was constantly working, constantly managing, constantly problem solving. Just everything was out of control. I was working every weekend. On top of that, I was shooting engagement sessions during the week. I was meeting with clients at night, editing every session constantly, putting out fires, managing a team, and just dealing with growth. The day-to-day of managing working a running business. On top of that, I was, managing motherhood, being a new wife, and running a home. And slowly, without even realizing it, the business I built to create presence for my family became the very thing taking me away from them. That realization just really wrecked me because I didn't build this business to become rich. That was never the goal. I built this business because I wanted to be fully present with them and be able to stay home with them during the school year and during summer and provide well for them and create a life that just felt intentional and secure. But now, man, I was just gone all the time. Every weekend, I was gone. In the winter, it was engagement season, and mom was doing bridal shows and always in consultations. In the spring, that's marketing season, and I had to update the website and book all the weddings. And summer, gone. Mom's just always gone. Fall, that's family Christmas card season and deep wedding season in the Midwest because the trees look so beautiful. You'll maybe see her at Christmas, maybe, if she doesn't have a holiday wedding or a New Year's Eve wedding coming up. And just every season had another reason why mom was unavailable. And it was, don't bother mom, she's working. And honestly, even when I was physically present, mentally, I wasn't. Because survival mode never rests. Your mind keeps scanning, planning, preparing, anticipating, managing. And eventually I became exhausted trying to maintain a life I originally built for freedom. And I just remember this one night. Everything just collapsed physically. My anxiety attacks had been returning. My health was just spiraling. I was so overweight. I was eating horribly, and my nervous system was completely overloaded. And I remember my husband literally peeling me off the floor during a breakdown because I physically could not keep going like that anymore. And I think that hit me the hardest. And not just the exhaustion, it was the realization that I had lost sight of my why. I built this to be present, and now I wasn't present, and something had to change. The thing about survival mode is that eventually it stops feeling temporary, and it just starts feeling like you become the responsible one, the dependable one, the productive one, the capable one, and the strong one. The one who always figures it out. And because the world rewards high functioning women, nobody questions you, including you. But survival mode can become so normalized that you stop recognizing it as fear and you start calling it ambition and leadership and responsibility, wisdom and stewardship. But underneath all of it is this constant internal pressure saying, if I stop pushing, everything falls apart. And I think this especially happens for women who carried responsibility really, really early in life. Survival mode trains your nervous system to associate slowing down with danger. So even when things become stable, your body doesn't know how to stop bracing. And eventually you just start trying to solve spiritually misaligned living with better management. And if you think like, oh, I'll just start organizing better, or if I become more productive, if I optimize more, if I work harder, then maybe you'll finally find that peace. But peace does not come from better management when fear is still leading. You know, one of the stories I really, really related to was the story of Martha. And I think a lot of women misunderstand Martha. So let's read her story together in Luke 10. Okay, so Luke 10:38. Now as they went on their way, Jesus entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving. And she went up to him and said, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me. But the Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her. So I love that Jesus never rebukes Martha first for caring, right? He never rebuked her for serving, and he never rebuked her for wanting things to be handled really well. The issue was deeper. So first, scripture says that Martha was distracted with much serving. And then Jesus says, Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things. That line hits differently when you've lived in survival mode. Because Martha wasn't doing sinful things. She was carrying too many things from an anxious spirit. And that is just so relatable because that was me. I was anxious about growth. I was anxious about finances. I was anxious about the future. I was anxious about maintaining everything. Anxious about failing my family. Anxious about failing my team. Anxious about what would happen if I slowed down. And eventually, anxiety became the pace setter of my life. And the hard part is when anxiety produces results, you start trusting it. You start believing this pressure is why everything is working. But eventually, survival mode demands payment. And that payment is usually your peace, your health, your relationships, your presence, and your ability to actually enjoy your life. And I think some women need to hear this deeply. God does not glorify your exhaustion. He is not asking you to destroy yourself to prove you are faithful. And I think survival mode distorts our view of faithfulness sometimes because we start believing being needed constantly equals significance, or being exhausted equals responsibility. Being overextended equals maturity. And I've said this before, that entrepreneurs wear exhaustion kind of like a badge of honor. But really, I think we're just masking fear. I see myself represented this way in the story of Elijah. I think a lot of people know the story of Elijah as like this bold prophet, um, the miracle worker, the man who called down fire from heaven. But what's interesting is what happens after the miracle. Because in 1 Kings 18, Elijah experiences this massive victory moment with God. God shows up powerfully and, fire falls from heaven, false prophets are exposed. It's this like huge public moment where you would think, okay, now everything should feel amazing. But then immediately after that, Jezebel threatens his life, and suddenly Elijah runs into the wilderness completely overwhelmed. And then in 1 Kings 19, it says, let's look at this up really fast. So 1 Kings 19:4, but he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree, and he asked that he might die, saying, "It is enough now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers." And he lay down and slept under a broom tree. And behold, an angel touched him and said to him, "Arise and eat." So at first, my reaction was like, how can you say that, Elijah, after God just proved himself? You just had all this success, and now you want to die? But then I was like, wait a minute. That was me. I mean, I just had like all this success in my business, yet I'm like on the floor having this panic attack, right? I guess that's relatable. Um, I think sometimes we assume exhaustion only happens when someone is failing, but Elijah wasn't failing. He had just experienced incredible breakthrough and victory and provision, and God moving very, very powerfully. And yet here he is completely depleted emotionally and physically and mentally. And honestly, that was such a mirror for me because externally my business looked successful. God was providing, the business was growing, and things were working, but internally I was exhausted. And I love that scripture doesn't hide that. It doesn't clean Elijah up. It doesn't pretend strong people never collapse under pressure. It shows us as human beings who carry pressure for way too long. And what's beautiful to me is what God does next, because God doesn't immediately correct Elijah. What's his answers? His answer for Elijah was sleep, then food, then more sleep. It says, and behold, an angel touched him and said to him, "Arise and eat." And he looked, and behold, there was his head, a cake baked on hot stones, and a jar of water. And he ate and drank and lay down again. And the angel of the Lord came again a second time and touched him and said, "Arise and eat, for the journey is too great for you." And he arose and ate and drank and went in the strength of that food, 40 days and 40 nights. So God doesn't immediately correct Elijah. His answer for Elijah was sleep, then food, then more sleep. I mean, that sounds amazing to me. I mean, how many of us feel better after a snack and a nap? But honestly, women, hear this. Survival mode will convince you exhaustion is normal. That constant depletion is just part of being responsible. That burnout is proof you care. But God never glorified Elijah's exhaustion. He cared for him in it. And God is not asking you to glorify your exhaustion either. He is asking you to cast all your cares and worries upon Him. Sometimes your body is revealing what your soul has been carrying for too long. And I think that breakdown season forced me to confront something honestly, that I had built my entire life around avoiding collapse while slowly collapsing internally. And that's why rest became such a spiritual issue for me. Because rest forces you to confront this question: do I actually trust God enough to stop carrying everything myself? I saw who I had become, and I realized that I had spent years trying to create safety through over functioning. But safety was never supposed to come from me carrying everything. That's why the issue of rest is ultimately a trust issue. Because rest requires you to confront this terrifying question: what if I stop and everything keeps moving without me? And survival mode hates that question, because survival mode quietly believes everything depends on you, but God never asked you to be the savior of your own life. I think this is where some women need to slow down long enough to ask themselves a really uncomfortable question: what's actually setting the pace of my life right now? Because we know survival mode has a way of disguising itself. So you keep saying yes, you keep pushing, you keep caring, you keep functioning, you keep overriding what your body, your relationship, and your soul has been trying to tell you. And eventually you stop asking, is this sustainable? Because survival mode only cares about surviving today, not the long-term condition of your soul. And I think the women listening already know this feeling. You sit down to rest, but mentally you can't. Your body is still tense. Your mind is still scanning. You feel guilty slowing down. You feel behind even when you're doing enough. And maybe nobody around you even realizes how exhausted you are, because externally you still look high functioning. But internally, you feel constantly overwhelmed, constantly needed, constantly caring. And eventually your entire life starts operating from reaction instead of presence. I think that's why this matters spiritually, because fear will eventually start dictating your pace if you never confront it. It's not wisdom, it's not peace, it's not alignment. It's fear. Some women need permission to admit this. This way of living is no longer producing good fruit in me. And it's not because you're lazy, it's not because you lack discipline. It's not because hard work is bad. But God never asked you to build your life in a constant state of internal panic. And I think one of the clearest signs that survival mode is leading your life is if you no longer know how to fully be present anywhere. Not with God, not with your family, not even with yourself. Because internally, you never stop bracing. Here's the hard truth. Just because survival mode helped you survive doesn't mean it's qualified to lead your life. Some of you are trying to earn safety through exhaustion, and eventually your body tells you the truth your mind has been trying to outrun. You cannot experience peace while worshiping productivity. And I think one of the hardest realizations for me was that I became absent trying to create presence. I built this business for freedom, for my family, for flexibility, for intentional living. And eventually fear turned it into pressure. And the scary thing is, externally, it looked successful, but internally, I was collapsing. And I think some of you are waiting for life to slow down before you rest. But I promise you, survival mode never voluntarily slows down. It just keeps demanding more. More effort, more proving, more caring and scanning and pressure, until eventually something breaks, and that something will be you or the ones around you. And sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is finally admit this pace is not sustainable. I had to do that. Here are the questions I want you to sit with this week. Where has survival mode become normal in your life? And what are you afraid will happen if you truly slow down? Have you confused overworking with responsibility? And what relationships are quietly paying the price for your pace? Are you physically present, but emotionally unavailable? Have you started measuring your value by how much you produce? Because if rest makes you feel guilty, that's usually revealing something deeper. And finally, what if God never asked you to carry this much in the first place? This week, I want you to pay attention to the pace. Not just your schedule, not internal pace, but notice how often your mind is scanning, how difficult it is to stop, how uncomfortable rest feels, how quickly guilt shows up when you slow down. And instead of overriding it, bring it before God, honestly, and ask Him, where has fear been leading me? What am I carrying that you never asked me to carry? What would trusting you actually look like? Because survival mode may have protected you in one season, but God is not calling you to spend your entire life braced for impact. And that's what I learned when God began to show me another way. If something from today's episode resonated with you, you have a story you would like to share or questions, I genuinely would love to hear from you. You can email me at karenwithani.pod@gmail.com, or if you want to stay connected outside of the podcast, you can find me over on Instagram. I share more behind the scenes, conversations, and updates there. You can listen to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, or for the full experience, you can watch every episode on Spotify and YouTube. It would mean so much to us if you would like, follow, subscribe, and share. You can leave a comment and give us a review. Interact with the show wherever you can. Honestly, it's the best way you can support the show and help the message reach other listeners like you. We'll talk about that next week. Until then, go build bold.